나무미라부츠, 나무미라부츠, 나무미라부츠. Hello there, folks, and good morning. Ohayo gozaimasu and aloha. I hope you're all having a very good Sunday and all having a very good October. It was very wonderful to get to join you folks just a few weeks ago for the retirement ceremony for Nimban Ito. It was very nice to get to see so many of you and to, get caught up with my friends from back in LA. So for the Dharma talk today, I thought we'd talk about something a little seasonal and something that actually for Los Angeles is coming up in just another week. Since I'm not doing the Dharma talk for next week, I figure I'd talk about it this time. Now, in just a few days, we're going to be having Halloween. Here in Hawaii, Halloween decorations are pretty rare, but on the mainland, people go all out, especially in the suburbs, with decorations for probably the biggest non-religious holiday, non-religious, government-affiliated holiday that we have in the United States. And so Halloween's something that has only grown and grown and grown ever since I was a kid. I remember back when it was mostly just kids who celebrated it, but nowadays you can see Halloween being enjoyed by people of all ages. And even when I was in Japan in 2017, I noticed that the Halloween bug was catching, that people in Japan were starting to have decorations at stores and cakes and desserts and things like that with all kinds of Halloween decorations. We have some of those here, each one kind of representing different aspects of Halloween in America. And so, of course, Halloween has its origins in Celtic festivals. You have Samhain taking place at a time when the harvest is over in ancient Ireland, in the area where the Celts lived. And so they believed that it was a time when the veil between worlds was very thin, and that it was a time when the spirits would return to the world of the living. And so the original reason for the jack-o'-lantern was, they would carve out gourds and other kind of root vegetables and put candles in it to ward off evil spirits. And the origin of trick-or-treating is that people in those ancient times would dress up as the deceased, as the spirits of people, and kind of play pranks and ask for donations from the neighboring people. And so eventually that would kind of grow and grow and grow as Irish Americans and people descended from those Celts came to America and brought the Halloween tradition with them. And so even though we're not, the origins of Halloween have become kind of hazy, I think it's a very exciting part of the year. If any of you have gone to Home Depot in the past couple of months, you've probably noticed that they have all kinds of decorations up for Halloween, including, I think, one of the wildest things is like a 30-foot skeleton that you put in your front yard. It looks like that famous ukiyo-e painting of the giant skeleton menacing some samurai. But, Halloween is something that, why on earth is it so popular? Something that, it's October, there's not a lot of other holidays until you get into December. It's pretty far separated from, the 4th of July and things like that. So it's kind of a time when there's not a lot of other holidays coming on. And, from our agrarian history, it's a time when the harvest is done. So people are naturally thinking about, in fall time, the sort of life cycle of the foods that we eat and the human life cycle as well. So I think one of the reasons why Halloween has become so popular is that it is a way for us to introduce something that can be a little scary. Things like, you notice these ghosts and witches and things like that. Skeletons. Halloween is a time when we get out horror movies that we like to watch and enjoy those. And I think that Halloween has become this time when we can safely experience these things that normally would scare us. And I think, aside from public speaking, one of the things that is most frightening to people, to any human being is death. And so, why is it that we celebrate this holiday where people dress up as spirits and skeletons and the undead and things like that? It's sort of ghoulish as a holiday, but I think it is a way for us to be thinking about and having a little fun with the concept of life and death. It's sort of like, why are horror movies so popular? They have all kinds of life and death situations, and when you're watching a horror movie, you can have, your heart's beating, you're eating your popcorn, you're drinking your soda, and you're, just waiting for the next scare, and, you're so worried, like when you really get absorbed in a movie, you feel like you're in the place of the movie character, that, if they're in a life and death situation, you feel that too. So I think one of the reasons why horror movies are so popular is that it gives us a way to experience something that really scares us in a safe way. During a horror movie, you can cover your eyes, you can cover your ears, you can run out of the room if something is so scary, something that we're not able to easily do in our real life. And another thing that scared me when I was really young was roller coasters. Even the very mild roller coasters at Disneyland used to really scare me. When my when my friends would want to go on a roller coaster, I'd always think of some excuse why I couldn't, and I was terrified of going on them. But after being forced to go on a roller coaster, what I realized is that you're getting the experience of being put in something that your body thinks is a dangerous situation, something that, oh gosh, I could fly off the tracks, I could crash, I'm going so fast. It's like being in a out of control car, but, you have all these security devices built in that are actually quite safe. So I think that's why people enjoy roller coasters. It gives us a way to experience something that is something that we try not to get ourselves into ordinarily, things that scare us, things that make us nervous, and things that make us anxious, and it gives us a safe way to experience that. And it's the same way with Halloween. It's the same way with Obon. Obon is something that we celebrate, and it's centered around death, the death of loved ones. It's historically a time when the ancient Japanese believed that it was a time when spirits would come and visit the living. People would put out food, to feed their relatives returning to the world of the living from the other shore. And so even though we see that as more of a metaphor, it's the thought of coming in contact with something that is usually we try not to think about. We try not to think about death. In Renyo's Ofumi Hakotsu, talks about the idea of life and death as being something that is universal. Nobody, whether you're rich or poor or your circumstances, everyone is subject to sickness, old age, and death. That's the truth of the world that Shakyamuni discovered for himself after leaving his family palace, these 4 times, as he saw that, we are mortal. And in fact, the decorations of skulls and skeletons and bones that you see in many ancient cultures is what they call a memento mori, not so gentle reminder that all of us are mortal too. And bringing death as something that we are made to think about in our everyday lives, not just when we are coming to the end of our life or when we're coming in contact with death through a loved one. These things like Halloween, things like Obon, they are reminding us that, we are mortal beings. And so, that had me remembering this wonderful experience that I had in Los Angeles. At the Hollywood Forever Cemetery, there's a Dia de los Muertos. It's a Mexican-American and, a Central American celebration that takes place on November 1st and 2nd. And so it's actually very, very similar to our Obon. The Dia de los Muertos, or Day of the Dead, is a celebration. It's an occasion to remember our deceased loved ones. And so they have quite a wonderful tradition in Mexican culture, where they have elaborate altars that they build called ofrendas, that they place, much like in Obon history, they place the favorite dishes of the deceased. They have pictures, and they also have these skull decorations made out of sugar, these calaveras, these skeletons, which are decorated with all kinds of colors and very beautifully decorated in some cases. You can see an example of one of the Mexican skull decorations that I picked up from our local Mexican food supply store. And so, why is it that they have these beautiful decorations on something that is so frightening to us as a skull? If we saw a skull in real life, it would be very unsettling. Seeing bones, seeing skulls, it's something that reminds us of death and something that seems very gloomy. But in Mexican culture, something that comes from like the pre-Columbian, pre-Spanish times that is combined with Catholic culture, is this celebration of life called Dia de los Muertos. And so they had a really interesting explanation that I think actually is very, very similar to what we talk about in Buddhism. So this is from the Day of the Dead holiday website, talking about the colorfulness of sugar skulls. So now, why are these somehow endearing skulls decorated with little icing details instead of just being the mold of the skull? Is it so that they look cute instead of creepy? Not exactly. Everything about Dia de los Muertos is bright and colorful, especially the decorations. If we're going to add sugar skulls to an altar, these sugar skulls should be decorated with bright icing and shiny colored foil to simulate orange hair, red eyes, and a giant white smile. The reason a holiday revolving around death is so full of color instead of being gloomy and gray is because we celebrate the lives led by those who are now gone. It is not simply a day about mourning our loved ones and telling stories of them around their tombstones in the cemetery or our altars. It is a day about remembering their lives and the impact they had upon us, as well as keeping in mind that just because they're no longer with us doesn't mean that they're entirely gone, because we keep them alive in our hearts and memories. So I thought this is a very beautiful way to put it. It's that, our loved ones are not gone from their lives when they pass away. We carry them with us, not just in DNA and things like that, but in the things that we like, the way that we think, the way that we approach the world, the way that we've been raised, not just our parents, but our grandparents, great-grandparents, family members, family friends. There's so many people who had this huge impact in our lives, and that, these skulls and other decorations become a colorful way to celebrate their memory. There's a custom, a Mexican-American custom, to have the name of someone who's passed away written on one of these sugar skulls. And in fact, one tradition is to give a sugar skull with the name of someone who's important to you to somebody who is still alive. This is not to give them a memento mori to remind them that they will pass away someday, but it's a way of showing that they are as important to us as our loved ones who are now gone. And so a celebration, not just for the dead, but for the living, I think is quite beautiful. So I hope that if any of you are able to visit and enjoy a Dia de los Muertos celebration, you know, everyone is welcome, and it's a wonderful way to see how other cultures, other religions approach life and death. I think that we're also anxious about life and death. In fact, Shinran Shonin himself, it said that when he was living in the monastery, he had a dream where he had this vision that said that he was going to die in 10 years, and that this was the thing that pushed him. He realized that he was so far away from enlightenment that it was one of the reasons why he would eventually leave the monastery and to go seek answers outside of Mount Hiei. You know, in Renyo's Ofumi, his talk about death being something that is inevitable, something that happens to everybody, is not something that should cause us to be depressed. It's something that should push us to make the most of the time that we have. That if the people who go before us and the people who go after us are more numerous than the dewdrops that rest briefly on leaves and branches, he's saying that this is an anxiety, a condition that all of us face, and that, you know, like Dia de los Muertos, like Halloween, like Obon, like these occasions where we're thinking about death, it's actually a communal experience. You know, things can feel very lonely when we think about our own death, or the death, the passing, the loss of our loved ones. It can feel very lonely to experience those things, and I've talked to many families who have gone through many hardships as, you know, they lose loved ones. But I think the message of Dia de los Muertos, of Obon, is that death is something that we all share. It's an experience that everyone has had some connection to. You know, who among us has not had some kind of experience of death? That's a story of Kisa Gotami, you know, the ancient story of the woman who wanted the Buddha to bring back her child, and he has her go and talk to everybody in the village. And it turns out that, you know, he says, if you find one person who has not experienced death, you know, then I will bring your child back to life. But, you know, he knows that she is going to encounter that everybody there has lost somebody. And it's something that becomes a deep realization to her that death is something that we all have some connection to. And so if we can see death as something more commonplace, something that is not a horrible thing to be ashamed of and afraid of, and to, you know, put it out of our mind and to never think about it, we're going to really suffer when we encounter it ourselves, when we hit against death in our own lives. But if we can learn to see death as another part of life, something that everybody shares, that it's a grief and a memory that can be shared by whole communities of people, that it can be a thing of beauty, a thing of inspiration in remembering the lives of our loved ones and celebrating them, that death can be something that is not so frightening to us. And I think Shinran would eventually find this great peace in knowing that, you know, death is not something that he would have to worry about, that, your own piety, that your own meditation and your own hard work, that is not something that is a barrier to you being able to find peace and happiness. You can find it through the Buddha Dharma and through the power beyond the self that Amida represents. And so we can see death as something that is just another side of life. And so thank you folks very much for listening to me today. I hope you all get to have a nice Halloween, hopefully get to see a little bit about Dia de los Muertos in Los Angeles, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thank you very much. Namo